Okay. Looks like everyone's getting settled with their audio. So I just want to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us with this session that we have today. I am Olivia McCants, the Assistant Director of Career Services at Bloomberg. Today we have with us Zach Predmore, and so he's going to be talking about navigating a nonprofit research organization. And with that, I will hand it over to Zach so he can do a full introduction of himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zach Predmore. I'm an associate policy researcher at RAND. I've been in this role at RAND since June of 2020 when I finished my PhD in health policy and management at Bloomberg. I can talk a little bit more now about RAND, Olivia, if that's what the...
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, so RAND, for those of you who are unaware of the organization, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization. RAND's goals and objectives are to produce high quality, objective research on pressing policy topics with the goal of using evidence to help better inform policy at federal, state, local, and even organizational health system kind of level policy. RAND work on all different types of policy issues. So I work primarily in healthcare, but we also have divisions that focus on social and economic well-being, justice, infrastructure, the environment, education and labor. And then we also have a good amount of research that goes on in our defense and homeland security research groups as well. As a researcher at RAND, you sort of can work across these different policy areas. So it's very common to see people who do a little bit of work in healthcare, a little bit of work in education, and kind of cross that as well. My specific research, I do a lot of work related to healthcare technology. Recently, that's really meant a lot of work looking at telehealth, which has become really popular and much more highly used during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I do sort of mixed methods work in that area, talking with providers who have implemented telehealth, talking to patients who have used telehealth services, as well as sort of more quantitative things, looking at healthcare claims that might be able to calculate the number of visits via different modalities, how different patient demographics affect telehealth use, things like that. I also do a lot of work looking at patient preferences in general. So work looking at patient experiences with primary care and hospital care, and then thinking about just generally how we incorporate patient voices into value assessment. So thinking about new health technologies, right? How do we incorporate patient perspectives into our assessments of whether or not treatments are valuable and effective? And then also a lot of the work that we do at RAND and I do personally is sort of evaluation work. So in these types of projects, a funder will have implemented a program or an initiative, either nationally or locally, and then they'll hire us to sort of come in and do that evaluation and look at, what are the impacts of this program on the ground? Is the program achieving its stated goals? What's the impact on the people who are served by the program? So a lot of that evaluation work as well, which uses, sort of the same research tools, the research methods, the quantitative, the qualitative, but has a slightly different kind of focus and sort of really more focused on the immediate impacts of ongoing programs. We do work in my role, right, it's sort of all stages of research and evaluation processes. So from proposal initiation, idea generation, writing up work plans and analysis plans, doing the data collection and analysis, and then ultimately writing up results and disseminating them to have the biggest impact on policy.
Thank you for sharing that. So for those of you who may not have saw the description, this is a moderated Q&A. So I will move forward with asking questions of Zach, but you will definitely have the opportunity to ask some questions of your own. If maybe there are any things that were not addressed during the moderated part, or maybe some specific questions that you have for yourself and your experience, you'll be able to do that. So with that, the second question that I have for you, Zach, is can you provide a little bit more detail about your academic and career path thus far? You mentioned that you recently completed your PhD program and then, your experiences at RAND, but just a little bit more information about, where you have been coming to this point right now.
Sure. I'll start at the beginning. So I got my undergrad degree in 2011. My degree was in chemistry with a minor in global health and health policy. Back in the day, I had the goal, the plan to go pre-med. So I had taken the MCAT and sort of done all that stuff to become a doctor. I then worked for a little bit. I worked at Epic Systems out in Madison, Wisconsin, which they're a large electronic medical record company. So I was working with health systems that were installing EHRs. And through that role, I really determined that what I personally wanted from a career was not necessarily working with individual patients, but thinking more about healthcare kind of as a system, and thinking about how policy can be used to impact the quality and outcomes of healthcare for patients. So, with that new sort of focus, I then actually, in 2013, started first working at RAND as a research assistant. And I worked there for about 3 years in the Boston office, doing a variety of health services, health policy research projects. That confirmed that I wanted to get a PhD. So I applied to PhD programs and started at Hopkins Health Policy and Management in 2016. I then spent 4 years getting my PhD, finishing in June of 2020. I was sort of one of the first pandemic dissertation defenses, which was really fun. And then started at RAND in June of 2020 after that. I've been there for about 2 years now.
Nice, thank you. So you are right now a associate policy researcher, and you shared about the work that you do. Can you give us more of a feel of the day in the life? So what does it look like for you, when you are starting work, and kind of just to give the students an idea of what to expect if they were to be in a role like that?
For sure. So I'm sure whenever anyone answers this question, they always say, well, every day is so different, right? It's hard to define. But and that's the case to some extent, but most days follow a pretty similar pattern. I think, on a typical day, I'm going to have between 2 and 3 hours of meetings. These can be internal project check-in meetings. They can be meetings with clients where we're going over deliverables or project progress, giving them updates. And then, I do a lot of qualitative research, so I'll often, on some days have an interview with a person, right, where I'm leading a discussion and sort of trying to get at research questions through that way. A typical day, you're also going to have, it is a large organization, right? There's some bureaucracy, emails, things like that. So a typical day, I'll spend, maybe an hour or so dealing with some quality assurance process that's going on, or responding to emails, addressing some report that's coming out. And then sort of whatever time is left over after kind of doing all that is the deep research work where, I'm working on analysis plans or doing analysis, writing up results into reports, sort of sitting with my head down at my desk, just writing that, reading papers, things like that, kind of the work of research that ideally you spend most of your time doing, but some of the day ends up getting taken up by kind of the more working at a company type things.
Now, just a quick follow-up to that. It looks like we actually have a question. If you don't mind, I'll put this question out there for you to answer. Is that okay? So it says, it seems like at RAND there are some specific career trajectories from entry level to more senior. How would you recommend people enter the organization when they have significant prior work experience and are entering at the assistant or lower associate levels? Is that common?
Yeah, so definitely just in general about hiring, right? RAND posts every open job opportunity on the website. So everything that can kind of be your first stop, reading job descriptions there as far as the specific things that we're looking for different positions. I see, Melanie just added a comment here about, yeah, so if you're coming in kind of with a doctorate, will put you on the research track. We have within the research track, there are 3 different levels of positions. There's the associate position, the full, and then the senior, different researcher levels. Typically, people who are coming out of doctoral programs are going to enter at the associate level. unless you have like pretty substantial like prior research experience. And we're talking like, a good number, like 20, I don't want to give like a specific number, but like we're talking like 20 to 30 at least research peer-reviewed publications, if you're going to be trying to enter kind of at any level other than the associate. I think like obviously in specific cases, you're probably going to want to have like more of a one-on-one conversation with someone who's involved in the hiring process to see kind of how that works. But for most people who are like coming out of doctoral programs, you're going to be sort of in the associate level. Another key thing, right, is like a good indicator of that is like at the associate level, you're sort of working towards getting your own independent funding. If you have like an external source of funding, if you've already been the PI on grants or contracts, right, then that's going to be a sign that you could potentially enter at like a higher level.
Thank you. And thanks for asking that question, Melanie. So did you always know that you wanted to work in the nonprofit sector? And just kind of a follow-up with that is, what interested you? So if you did or you didn't, how'd you get connected and what made you want to kind of go towards this direction?
Yeah, so I'll just say like personally, right, like I had worked at Brand before, so I'm a little bit kind of a strange case in that regard. I knew that I liked the organization personally, and I think I really like the mission of the organization. I think the nonprofit nature of an organization like RAND makes it really much easier for us to be objective and nonpartisan. I think that's like very, very much a key part of working at this type of organization, right? Is like you're advocating generally for like the use of research and policy decisions, but not necessarily like specific policy decisions. I think looking at like the nonprofit world versus the for-profit world, which is something that I kind of considered when I was applying for jobs out of the PhD. Again, it does also come down to sort of that independence and the ability to sort of be objective. Whereas, I think a lot of people who are coming out of PhDs in public health are, sometimes looking at like consulting positions where you might be working for pharmaceutical companies or medical device companies. In which case, right, like the key difference, right, is that those companies, you're sort of working in the commercial interest of those companies, and not necessarily having that objectivity and impartiality that comes with a role like this at a nonprofit.
You kind of just spoke to this piece of it with kind of looking at what you're able to do with working at RAND and working within a nonprofit. But if you can just share a little bit more about what you enjoy about working within the nonprofit research organization specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing in a role like this is that you have a lot of freedom to work on things that you're interested in. Like as a researcher, right, I don't necessarily, I have technically a boss, right, who's sort of like the director of my department, but similar to academia in a lot of ways, I have a lot of flexibility with what I can work on. I submit grant proposals, I submit contract proposals for topics that I'm interested in. RAND has what's sort of called the internal labor market, which is how we get project work internally. So principal investigators bring in money in the form of grants and contracts. And then as sort of like associate researchers, we work with these more senior researchers to sort of get staffed on their projects. So there's a lot of flexibility and freedom in terms of what you get to work on. Like I'm at the point now, like 2 years in, right, where I have a pretty full schedule, right? I have a pretty full slate of projects. And so I have a lot of freedom. Like if someone comes to me with a project that seems really interesting, right, I have the ability to jump on their project. But if a project, I'm not as interested in, I can sort of pass on it or sort of take the next opportunity if it's something that I'm more interested in. So that that freedom is, I think, a really nice aspect of this type of work.
Yes, freedom and flexibility, I definitely think, especially where we are with the pandemic, that a lot of people are looking for that. And I'm sure RAND had that prior to, but it's good for individuals to know that is a component of the work that you do. So conversely, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced or that you just know of, and how have you gone about navigating them?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think exactly related to the independence. One of the challenges of that is that a job like this really forces you to be entrepreneurial, proactive, constantly on the lookout for new projects, right? I think, I've fallen into the situation a couple of times where I was working really hard on a project and then the project ended. And then I sort of was like, what do I do now? Right. So it requires you to kind of reach out to people, maybe take on some work that you're not necessarily as interested in, to kind of fill the gaps in your schedule, which it can certainly be stressful for people. The projects are also, I think compared to like an academic environment, we do tend to have like stricter deadlines, right? Like on a government contract, right? If we're due to send a report to Medicare by, a certain day, right? They need it by that day, right? It's not necessarily the case. Whereas like with a journal article, if you're submitting that in an academic setting, you want to get it in by a certain day, but the deadlines aren't necessarily as hard and fast as they can be in this sort of contract environment.
Absolutely. That's really good to know. We have another question in the chat, and I think this goes back to a previous question that I asked, and you spoke a little bit about the culture. So Melanie is asking, what is the organizational culture like? And I believe this is speaking towards RAND specifically.
Yeah, so at RAND, the organizational culture, it's a little bit of everything, right? I think we have people from all different disciplines, right? So we have, public health people, we have economists, we have psychologists, sociologists, people whose experience is mainly from the military. So I think that the key thing that sort of unites everyone is like an emphasis on this idea of like objective, high quality research. There's like very high internal standards for the types of things that we produce and publish and put out into the world, which is sort of key to maintaining the reputation. As far as like the organizational culture, I think we have offices, our headquarters is in Santa Monica, California. So if you know anything about Santa Monica, I would say that California attitude permeates the organizational culture, even though we now have offices in other places as well. It's a very hardworking place. People are very passionate and dedicated to what they're doing. But things are also relatively laid back. Things like dress code and stuff. There's not really I think if you were being completely unprofessional, that would probably not fly. But certainly, like jeans in the office are totally fine in terms of things like that. Is there anything else about organizational culture? I mean, it's a little bit harder also. Like starting in June of 2020, I've been into the office probably 5 times in the last 2 years. As a research assistant, several years ago, right, there certainly was, at least in the Boston office where I was based, a lot of camaraderie. We had weekly, like Wednesday lunches where everyone would come in. So there was sort of that culture. I think it's been a little bit harder to replicate in the mostly virtual environment, but that's a key part of the office culture as well.
Yeah, I can imagine trying to emulate, a lot of that team morale, right? And camaraderie through virtual has not been easy for every organization. We're definitely making it through. Just as a quick follow-up to the question that Melanie had, you had mentioned earlier that you have a director who's kind of over a lot of what you are doing. What is that supervisor relationship like, right? Especially now within the pandemic, because I know that also speaks to a piece of culture, maybe that's more of a specific piece and not just the organization, but more individualistic. What is that experience like for you?
Yeah, so our directors, there's a department director I'm within the behavioral and policy sciences department. So Malcolm Williams is our director. And then Sangeeta Oluwalia is a associate director. And so I check in with them probably once every 3-4 months, especially getting started. They are responsible for managing probably about 300 people. So, they're able to help, especially being a newer staff member, help me get acculturated. There were a couple of times, as I mentioned before, when I was finished a project and sort of looking for things to do next, where I reached out and they were able to very quickly connect me with people who were in need of support on projects. So That's been great. And I have had conversations with them sort of about long-term career growth and goals and plans. In addition to the sort of the formal director structure, there is also a lot of informal mentorship. You work on projects with senior researchers who have been at the organization in some cases for 20 plus years. They really are able to help you navigate. They've helped other people in the past. So they are very generally, I found people are willing to mentor. It's not going to be something where they will, many people won't do it proactively. I think as a newer staff member, it is sort of on you if you're looking for advice or help with something to reach out. I think that's a big part of it as well.
Seems like there's a great amount of autonomy here, which I think is important for students to know and recognize, because that in and of itself does come with some required skill sets, which I think we'll have the time to speak to a little bit later. So jumping back over to the chat, we have another question for you. It says, are you able to speak to what you have seen for individuals with a master's, and how might their role differ from your role as a research associate? The second part here is, what tips do you have for individuals with a master's interested in health policy research?
Yeah, no, so I think Rand is a great place for master's level people who are interested in health policy research. I had sort of mentioned the research career track earlier. For people, it's mainly for people with doctoral degrees, but for people with master's degrees, there tend to be two different sort of paths that they'll take at Rand. One is for people who are more interested in project management, contracting, grant management, things like that, making sure we're tracking timelines, deliverables, with the opportunity to do some research as well, but typically not like leading projects, sort of more, for example, right, like I work on some large evaluations. Each of those has a dedicated project manager who's responsible for sort of overseeing everything, making sure all timelines are met. And so that's often a person sort of with a master's degree, like an MPH or an MSPH, MPA, things like that, often fall into that role. And then on the other side, on the more technical side, people who are interested in being research programmers or technical analysts, those are also the typical master's level positions. So if you're coming in with like a master's in biostats or data science, or if you are just sort of like a more quantitatively focused person, we hire for those roles as well. So there are different postings that are on the website. So if you just go to rand.org and look up careers, there will be, when we're hiring for those types of positions, they'll be there. I did do a quick check before this call. I don't think we're actively hiring any of the first type currently, like project managers, but for the more technical programmer side, there are certainly positions that are available.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question. So another thing that I was kind of considering as far as your experience in working within nonprofit is just looking at the impact that nonprofit work has on public health. We know that there is definitely a difference between nonprofit and for-profit organizations. So can you speak to the significance of this particular industry within public health, or at least from your experience?
Yeah, so I think within the nonprofit space, RAND is really focused on the research. There are other nonprofits that are sort of more focused on public health practice or advocacy, but we're really focused just on like producing research and trying to have impact through the high quality research that we produce. So obviously the research is a big part of that, but then there also is the dissemination and sort of the work that goes on around that. We have an Office of Congressional Relations. So I haven't done this yet, but have worked with people who have testified before Congress, before state legislatures on various public policy issues. Like some of the telehealth work that I've been doing recently has attracted some like media attention as well. So I've done some interviews with local radio stations and publications to try to help publicize, right, our findings, the things that we think are of use to policymakers as they're thinking about like how to do telehealth policy going forward. But yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the way that we impact public health, right, is through research that informs policy.
Okay. And so would you say the work at RAND, with it having a focus on research, that it can affect practice and kind of feed into it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially like the more evaluation focused work, right? So for example, I can give a project that I'm working on right now. Um, it's been in the news a lot lately, looking at like capping insulin copays at $35 a month. And so this is like a topic of like legislative interest, but actually Medicare has like a small pilot program of this that's going on currently. And so we're actually evaluating this program. We're working with the health plans that are, implementing this $35 limit on copays. We're tracking sort of both their quantitative or doing interviews with them as well, to assess like the impact of this like test. And the goal of this project, right, is like to commission. It's going to be a report, right, that will ultimately, hopefully, be used to kind of inform the direction of like federal policy on the $35 insulin copays. So that's like an immediate impact of like work that we're doing right now.
Good. So with that, I kind of want to shift gears to bring into some of your Bloomberg experience. So you've got your PhD from Bloomberg. Can you share what specific components of your academic training at Bloomberg that you believe help support your current work? And we actually had a question in the chat that kind of ties into that, where they're asking about specific courses.
Yeah, so I think as Melanie says here, research methods are probably the most important like single course that you can take at Bloomberg if you're interested in a career like this. I think the other thing that's really important is your writing skills. I think in this type of role, you're just constantly writing. You're writing proposals, you're writing analysis plans, you're writing final reports, you're writing like, you write the full report and then you have to write a blog post to kind of summarize it, right? So like you're writing all the time for all different audiences. So like coming out of a PhD program, like very confident and comfortable writing in this like academic / policy focused, pretty objective, but like you're citing things, right? Sort of that style of writing is like very, very important. Being able to kind of write at all different levels, right? Whether it's like the 1-page summary of your report, as well as, like the 100-200-page report that's ultimately showing your results. So yeah, research methods, writing. I think the statistical side of things, that depends more kind of on your specific research focuses. As a mixed methods researcher, I tend to let the like statisticians and economists do more of like the very quantitative work. So I think the courses like the advanced biostats courses, like causal inference, longitudinal data analysis, are really important to know. But like depending on your role, your specific interests, you may or may not actually be like running the models yourself.
Thank you. And thank you, Melanie, for asking that question. So are there any like specific resume or even CV tips that you would share with students looking to apply to nonprofit organizations? Things that, and I know probably from your experience at RAND, but it's really kind of specific to the industry that they would want to highlight.
Yeah, so I would be sure to look at like, what is the goal of the nonprofit organization that you're applying to, right? So for a research focused organization like RAND, highlighting any research experiences that you have is going to be really important. Emphasis on publications, emphasis on like the specific things kind of that you did in your roles on those research teams. Even like writing research papers for class, that can be something that you can include, but like we tend to like to see like external publications, things like that. If you have the opportunity to do that and you're interested in a research career, I would really try to take those opportunities. If you're applying for like a more technical position, like a technical analyst or a programmer, emphasizing the specific skills that you have is going to be pretty important. And then the other just general piece of advice for a place like RAND that is like very, we work on all different public policy areas. The person who's reading your application might not be a public health person, right? They could be an economist or a political scientist, right? Depending on sort of who's reading applications that day. So making sure that you don't use too much like healthcare jargon or like abbreviations that you don't clarify, right? And like really kind of explaining things to like a, so if people phrase it, like like an interested, intelligent reader who doesn't necessarily know everything about this topic, right?
Yeah, that last piece definitely is key. That's not something that I honestly would have considered. I know when we work with a lot of students, we want them to put out that public health training and information, but considering this organization specifically and kind of being just broad enough that they have an understanding of things, because there are other individuals that are going to be looking at their documents. So thank you so much for sharing that. Can you also just from I guess, general lens, provide any advice that you know, would feel like is valuable to students who are interested in working in the nonprofit sector or just in nonprofit research organization?
Yeah, I mean, so within the I think just within the nonprofit sector, as I said, right, my tips are kind of more focused towards research. I think if you're applying to a position at, an organization that's more of like an advocacy organization or a public health practice organization, you're going to want to tailor, the experiences, right, to reflect more of that, right? Like I think if you're, going to work at an advocacy organization, you're talking about, you've done this systematic review and like this quantitative analysis, right? They're going to be like, great, but like, what have you done in terms of advocacy? So being sure that you really understand like the goals of the organizations that you're applying to and like what they are looking for in the job postings specifically. I think, let's see, in general, right, like nonprofits, you're going to want to make sure that you also emphasize like any other work experience, right? These are, companies, they're organizations. So being able to like show that you worked on teams, that you can communicate clearly, just kind of like general office and working skills are also good to mention and highlight, right? That sort of other work experience as well.
Definitely. I think it's good to hear to know that transferable skills are something that is a priority. Sometimes I know that we may get really focused in on like the technical skill sets or I haven't done exactly that particular type of thing before. And then maybe not considering how strong our transferable skills are. So it's great to know that that is something that they would want to lean into, especially if they're looking to go into this sector. So I want to open it up now for the students to kind of really start pouring in questions. We've had some of that happening, so thank you all so much for your participation thus far. I'm going to allow folks to take themselves off mute, and we'll kick it off with a question that we have in the chat from Bo. So it reads, some positions that I'm looking at said security clearance, ability to obtain and maintain a US government security clearance is preferred. The question is, does this mean that RAND only hires US citizens for these positions?
That's a good question. I do not know. I do not have a security clearance, so I am not the right person to talk to about this. I would think, if these postings have like a, right, I think that there are, if it's a position where the security clearance is required, you're going to want to make sure that you are able to sort of get a security clearance. Most positions, though, I think that they don't require one. Because of, as I said earlier, sort of like the cross-functional, right, across units. I have worked on like a handful of defense projects that have not required a security clearance. There was recently like a big homeland security project that people were asking about, but you had to have like some sort of homeland security fitness, which I did not have. I would. If there's like an email address in the job posting that asks about that, I would, sorry, I don't really know much more than that.
No, thank you. I think that's helpful to know because at least they have an idea that it's not every single position, right? And it sounds like it's more so specific to that particular role and if it's mentioned in the position description. So Jenny, if you want to go ahead, if you want to come off mute, you certainly can do that and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, thanks for your presentation. I'm a first-year PhD student in HPM, and I had a question about, you mentioned you're a mixed methods researcher, and I was just curious if you always knew you wanted to do mixed methods and what your experience was with that in the PhD program.
Yeah, I had a great experience with that. So I knew I wanted to do mixed methods because of work that I did as an RA at Rand before grad school. I had a couple of mentors who like let me do qualitative interviews as a research assistant, which was really great. And so I knew that like that was something that I wanted to have be a part of my career, thinking about mixed methods. I think that for a lot of the public health problems that we're looking at, like mixed methods really are key, right? They allow us to look at problems from all different angles, get at sort of the causes of things that the quantitative only might overlook or not allow us to look at. So I found that it was great. And I think that, I personally feel that a mixed methods dissertation is like a very good thing for PhD students to do. I think, there were a couple of students in my cohort who did the mixed methods approach, and it's a good amount of work, right? I think as an individual doing a mixed methods aim of your dissertation, or sorry, a qualitative aim of your dissertation, you're going to have to do like 20 interviews, which like is a lot for an individual person to do. But it's like it's a very nice contained project that like allows you to like I was done with my qualitative interviews like well before the rest of my dissertation, right? I just, did my interview guide, I scheduled the interviews, I did them, I analyzed them. It's sort of like a very reliable and like very easily partitionable part of a dissertation, which like when you're staring down the barrel of like writing this huge thing, like having a nice qualitative piece that you're going to get results for, and ideally you can publish is like a nice aspect of a dissertation.
So you kind of already touched on this with what you just spoke about, but would you say that's how you navigated the rigor of Bloomberg while you're working in your doctorate program, like that level of organization and kind of addressing things piece by piece?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think as a PhD student at Bloomberg, you have a lot going on, right? You have coursework, you've got TA requirements, you've got research assistantships, you've got just like generally your dissertation, thinking about that as well. And it can be a lot to kind of to navigate. I think my advisor gave me some great advice very early on, right? He said, you really are going to have to be selective, right, in what you choose to take on. You want to make sure that you take on projects that you're interested in, projects that will help you develop skills, and then really use your time wisely, because there is just so many different things that you can do. I think taking advantage of opportunities to sort of double up on things can be very good as well. So, especially as like a first and second year student, when you're taking coursework, you'll have a lot of like papers and things that you write. And to the extent that like you can use in-class work to advance other objectives and goals can be very effective. So for example, like in one of the classes, right, I think it was like quality of medical care that I took as a first year student, I used that like final paper as an opportunity to like do research in a topic that ultimately ended up being one of my research interests and like helped inform my dissertation, right? So looking for opportunities like that, not to, you certainly don't want to plagiarize, you don't want to like submit the same assignment to multiple things, but like using opportunities like in classes where you have freedom to kind of develop your own papers or project ideas, like actually using those to advance your research in other ways.
Very good insight there. Thank you. So you've shared that within RAND, it's not just solely public health, right? There are other individuals from different career fields that kind of make up the organization. So how do you remain abreast of the transitions within public health, seeing as that's been a focus area for you and what you've got your degree in?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the ways that I try to do that, looking at journals as things are being published. I've been using Twitter more lately and following different like journals or healthcare publications, things like that. On Twitter as well, to keep abreast of things like that, developments. Internally, we do a good amount of like research presentations. We have speakers who will talk about their research, going to conferences. That's like very supported. We have kind of like a staff development funds to allow us to go to conferences. Yeah, so very similar to like what you would do kind of as an academic group, but it is just kind of like a larger group, right? We have, you know, instead of like a university department where you may have like 20 to 30 faculty, right? We have like 300 healthcare researchers who are just involved in this, you know, big department.
Good. So there definitely is a lot that you can get out of this profession and just looking to continuously develop yourself professionally. Switching over to the chat, we have another question. It says, how is the health section / work organized at RAND in terms of the different main departments or organizational units at a high level?
Yeah, so most of the health work is housed within our healthcare division. And so this is like a, you know, a large one of our 7 or 8 research divisions. There are 3 subdivisions of it: access, cost, and quality. So projects are typically based within like one of those 3 subdivisions within the larger healthcare unit. And then there is also some additional health work that's done. There's like also a social and economic well-being unit that houses a lot of the public health research, environmental research, things like that are kind of more that can be healthcare focused, but also obviously things that are, you know, other social policies there as well. Then there is some military health work that's housed in like our defense units as well, right? So work with the DoD and the military health system, the VA, things like that as well. So that's kind of the 3, how I think about like at least the 3 large buckets of health work at RAND.
Nice. Thank you. So just kind of looking, actually, let's see, it looks like we have a student question. Oh, okay. So follow up to that, Melanie asked, are you in a BH division?
BH stands for
Would that be behavioral health?
Yeah. Yeah. So in addition to the way that RAND sort of corporate structure, right? In addition to the units, right, that are like healthcare, social and economic well-being, defense, things like that. Sort of crossing that is what we call departments. So there are 4 departments. I'm in like the behavioral and policy sciences department, but the other departments are things. There's like an economics department, engineering, and then defense and political sciences is another department. So there are people in behavioral and policy sciences who sort of work across healthcare, work across education, labor, defense.
Okay, so switching gears just a little bit here, I want to talk more about the process, right, of getting connected to nonprofit organizations. So I know you shared that you had experience coming into RAND, having served as an RA, but I'm guessing that you would have had to still gone through like an interview process and all of that, right? So can you just share, you know, what that experience was like for you as far as the interview for the nonprofit organization or even for RAND specifically?
Yeah. So when I was a 4th-year PhD student, so like sort of the fall of my last year, I started applying to positions, applied very broadly to positions. I sort of wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do after graduating and wanted to kind of look at all the different options that were going to be available. So for RAND specifically, there's an online portal, right, that you apply through, you submit resume, cover letter. I think RAND at that point requires 3 references. So they sort of request those very early in the process. So you have to get like actual letters from people. So you have to give them some time to sort of put those together. And I think RAND also asks for a writing sample. I think those are the big things in the application. And all applications, especially for new PhD grads, go through that portal. And like RAND has in recent years, like especially in like institutional efforts to improve like equity, has moved towards like a batch review of applications. So instead of being rolling or ad hoc, right, what they do is they take all those applications that they submit that are submitted sort of each fall, and then narrow that down to a list of phone interview candidates. Once they do that phone interview, then you get invited out for a full day interview at one of the offices. I guess it used to be one of the offices, maybe it's not anymore, it might be virtual now. But then you do, a full day of interviews and you do an hour-long research presentation. So that's kind of where they really get to see the work that you've been doing in your PhD or in your doctoral program. And, you're going to present usually typically like the findings from your dissertation and talk about the methods, talk about the results, and give them a sense of kind of like who you are as a researcher. Different organizations in the nonprofit space are going to have different ways of doing that. I would assume if you're not at like a more research focused organization, like a policy or practice organization, there's probably less emphasis on the research presentation, but that's a key part of sort of the RAND process as well. Did I answer the full question?
Yes, you did. Very good to know. I think that's definitely something to be prepared for, especially, going through a PhD program, you may become accustomed to presenting your research and different things like that, but it can feel different in an interview, right? When a job opportunity is on the line. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned the job search for you and how you're applying to different positions. Were there any challenges or obstacles that you experienced during that time?
Yeah, I think, some of the positions that I applied to, I think it's, when you're doing a PhD, it's a very like specialized degree. I think that can be to some positions that like might not necessarily often hire PhDs. They can be a little unsure kind of what to do with you. So what I found was that like, nonprofit research orgs were very interested, right? Bloomberg is like a top school, right? So they're very interested in getting Bloomberg graduates to work for them. And then I also found that like consulting firms were also very interested. So I did get some interest from like more healthcare focused firms as well as just general like consulting firms. So if you're interested in kind of that type of role as well, then I'm sure there are presentations on like what it's actually like to work in a for-profit consulting firm. But those were kind of the big two. And then of course, academic institutions, right? Like postdocs and assistant professorships were like also very aware of like what our programs were. But what I found was that like I applied to some other like, some other nonprofits, like I applied to a handful of pharmaceutical companies, but like really did not get any interest from them. But I think especially for like a research organization coming from a PhD, like you're really who they're trying to recruit. So that kind of made things very smooth. I will say one other thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that RAND does have a summer associate program for, it's meant for like PhD students who are in like, just finished their second or third year. But, we hire people for the summer. We typically hire like 50 to 60 associates total. And so, you come in for, 10 weeks and work on RAND projects, you work closely with mentors and you get a really good sense of like what it's like to work at this organization. So, we hire for that. I think applications are typically due in like early like January, February for the upcoming summer. But if anyone is sort of in that like year 2 or 3 of the PhD and you're kind of curious about working at a place like this and you have 10 weeks in the summer to come work, it's a good opportunity.
Absolutely. I definitely think that that's very helpful for the PhD or DRPH students that we have on today, or that may be watching the recording later on, or even the master's students that are considering going into a doctoral program, just to know that there's that opportunity with RAND. So I don't really have any more questions, and I know that we are getting close to time. So I'm not seeing anything coming through the chat either, but I just want to see if you have any final thoughts to share with folks.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed working at RAND. I was how in the last 2 years, I've really just flown by. They have been, I have certainly not been bored at work. I have been very interested in the work that I've been doing. I'm very excited about it. Logging on each day, excited to work on things. So that's been something that I've been quite happy with, and kind of I hadn't really thought about until kind of thinking about this retrospectively and looking back at my time here. Yeah, that's sort of the summary, right? Is that I'm quite happy with this position, and I think it's a great place to be if you're willing to kind of be entrepreneurial and sort of go at interesting and important questions.
Yeah, that's definitely great to hear. It's a very beautiful thing when you're able to do the work that you enjoy. And I mean, to be able to log in, like you say, and actually be excited and looking forward to it. So I just want to thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, not only about RAND, but just about nonprofit organizations in general. This was very helpful for me and very informative. So I hope that there are students who are either watching now or later that can take a lot away from this as well. This recording will be available for you all. So if you want to be able to watch it back, you should be getting it probably early tomorrow. Thanks again so much, Zach, for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to anyone else one-on-one if they want to. Always willing to chat with people, especially Bloomberg students.
All right, you all have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.